with losing Crimea, Putin will most probably lose his life as well. That's why these strikes on strategic objects will continue. And of course, we expect that with the Ukrainian army gaining access to Azov Sea, at least, the future of so-called Russian Crimea will be under big question. So,
hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio. I'm James Hansen, and today I'm delighted to be joined once again by Operator Starsky, Ukrainian veteran, YouTuber, and co-founder of the Propaganda Study Institute. Operator Starsky, always a pleasure. Welcome back to Frontline.
Good morning. It's always a pleasure.
First of all, I just wonder if you can give us your current assessment of what you think we are seeing at the moment in this conflict, and what you make of the current state of the war.
So we all heard that the aid that was promised from our allies will be delivered to Ukraine within, quote, hours, right? But of course, we understand that this is not so, and it will take some time, and Russians will try to use this window between the delivery of this aid to Ukraine in order to attempt to gain as much territory as possible. And this is what we see right now. Currently, I can tell you that their attempts to gain tactical advantage in the area of Chasiv Yar, particularly, is not successful. We have plenty of reports from the ground from our guys who say that even though the situation is very, very hard, Russians are attacking them every single day and night. And dropping gliding bombs, which are nasty, but they managed to deflect the attacks, and Chasiv Yar, luckily, is currently under our control. So this is the current situation. We do really expect this help, the aid to arrive to our guys as soon as possible, because there are plenty of targets, again, which was reported by our guys, for example, in Bakhmut. There are plenty of targets that are currently out of reach for our artillery, but luckily with new weaponry that will be delivered, we will be able to reach those targets.
And it's interesting what you say there about anticipating potentially a fresh Russian ground offensive in the next few weeks, which would make sense for Russia, if they were planning on doing that, to do it before the full impact of this new US military aid is felt.
Yeah, well, we already see this attack happening. I would not call it fresh attack. I would call it probably desperate attack, because they don't have enough troops to conduct a fresh attack, but they're throwing everything they have at our positions, trying to get advantage.
Just on the US military aid, what was your reaction when it was passed? Did you feel a mix of emotions? On the one hand, relief that it had finally passed through Congress, but on the other hand, frustration that it had taken so long.
Of course, I felt frustration that it took so long, because personally, I lost a lot of friends in the past half a year. But it was a big morale boost for our guys at the ground. Now they're saying that they will finally be able to work properly in proper conditions and with proper tools.
Just give us a sense, if you can, Operator Starsky, of the reality that troops on the front line in Ukraine have faced, what your friends and colleagues have been telling you over the past 6 months. You know, whilst the supplies have been drying up, whilst we've been waiting for this new aid package to be approved.
Well, it was really, really hard, guys. You have to understand, we don't have enough artillery to fight against Russian personnel on the first place, which is a big problem, because Russian artillery is probably their main weapon on the battlefield, because we know their tactic of so-called wall of fire. And we could not do anything to combat that, to respond to that. We have one howitzer against 10 Russian howitzers, and of course, with limited supplies, we cannot conduct our defensive activities as much as we had to, right? So that's a big problem, and of course, Russians have their aviation operating in the area. Their gliding bombs again. It's a very serious weapon, and places like Chasiv Yar, places like Liman, Kramatorsk, those areas, they are being hit very, very often because with lack of proper anti-air defense, with lack of interceptors, jet fighters that could intercept Russian aviation. They can launch, they can basically drop those gliding bombs at a range of approximately 75 kilometers away from the target, which makes them, I would say, invulnerable. And it's another problem. And in this new aid package, hopefully we will receive proper anti-air defense. We're talking about Patriot systems, NASAMS. We're talking about missiles for those systems, and of course, air-to-air missiles for our jet fighters.
And also, I'm guessing just fresh ammunition rounds is incredibly important on the front line.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to ask you about some of the tactics we're seeing from Russia on the ground. It was interesting on yesterday's episode of Frontline, I was speaking to Hamish de Bretton Gordon, former UK Army commander, and he said that he was getting reports that Russia increasingly are using CS gas on the front line to clear out Ukrainian trenches. Now, I mean, obviously, it's worth saying that would be a breach of international law, but not the first, clearly, from Russia in this entire conflict. Is that also what you are hearing?
Yeah, there were such cases, but I gotta tell you that Russians were using irritating substances like CS gas, that their analog, for quite a while. We had such reports since 2015 when Russians were trying to take control over the Donetsk airport. We know that the defense of this airport lasted for 242 days. And they were already back then in 2015 when this war was not full scale, but it was a beginning of this war, the hybrid phase of this war. They were already using CS gas on defenders of the Donetsk airport. There's plenty testaments of witnesses regarding this.
Obviously, one of the most high profile pieces of weaponry believed to be included in this new USA package is the ATACMS, these longer range ATACMS. How do you think they will be used operationally? Do you think they'll be focused, for example, on trying to destroy the Kerch Bridge? Do you think they'll be used on Russian infrastructure well behind the line? How do you anticipate them actually being used by Ukraine?
It's really hard to use ATACMS missiles against targets like Kerch Bridge, and the reason for that is because humankind builds bridges for thousands of years, and we know how to build them properly. Okay, I saw several bridges that were hit by much bigger missiles, like Tochka U, for example, and they didn't collapse. That's why. I'm sure that ATACMS will not be used against that bridge. We also saw ATACMS missiles that were the result of their strikes on, for example, Antonovsky Bridge. So you probably understand that it's not the kind of missiles that can be used to demolish bridges like Kerch Bridge, for example. So in order to destroy such bridge, you need different equipment, probably something like Tomahawk missiles, and not only one missile, but several. But I think that ATACMS missiles will undoubtedly be used to disrupt Russian logistics, hit their command centers, anti-air systems, and other strategically important objects.
And that is an area where, even though things have been incredibly stretched for Ukraine on the front line, given the lack of supplies in recent months, Ukraine has still had remarkable success at using long range missiles to target some of those Russian energy infrastructure pieces.
Yeah, and not only missiles, also drones. Um, Another thing that we have to mention here is that, of course, Ukraine uses plenty of different types of drones on a tactical level, on operative level, but um, Russians also use electronic warfare machines to suppress those drones, and this is why artillery, uh, like primitive common artillery, is so much useful at the front lines to strike Russian personnel and Russian vehicles and ammo storages and command posts.
How long do you think it will be until the full impact of this fresh US military aid is actually felt in Ukraine?
I think it depends on the time of delivery of this aid to our positions on the first place, because there's already plan developed for our further steps, right? We only need tools to make it happen. So I think the first question is delivery, and this is where we have to expect actions from Russian invaders who will obviously try to disrupt our logistics and our attempts to supply this aid to our guys on the front line.
And I think what we're all hoping is that the West has not become complacent now that this military aid package has been approved by US Congress. Hopefully, it'll make a big difference, but alone it is not enough, and there needs to be more. And I'm wondering in particular whether you think, for example, Germany granting access to the Taurus missiles could be the kind of thing that could actually make a further difference in Ukraine.
I think Germany could have done it already, right? If they had political will, and if I'm talking about Mr. Scholz, of course, if he had political will, he would do that already. But we don't see that, unfortunately, and something tells me that it will never happen. We won't see Taurus missiles in Ukraine. Um, we will see, I believe, other kinds of support and military aid. There are already factories being built, factories for producing artillery shells, because luckily our allies realized that this is very important nowadays for Ukrainian defenders. But unfortunately, this takes a lot of time. But on the other hand, because our allies, comparing to Russia, even that produces plenty of shells on a daily basis, but they are very strong and they have very powerful economy, again, comparing to Russia, and they will be able to do that.
Just on the Taurus missiles, one of the arguments that Olaf Scholz makes against providing them is he says it would be an escalation, not only because of how they might be used by Ukraine against Russia, but also because he believes it would require German soldiers to be on the ground in Ukraine helping to program the missiles. Now, I know some analysts have disputed that and said that actually you wouldn't need German soldiers on the ground. Do you think that Ukraine has the expertise already within its forces to program the missiles themselves?
Well, since we're building our own missiles, like Neptune, for example, those missiles that destroyed Russian flagship Moskva in the Black Sea, of course, we have capability to program foreign missiles as well. The problem is lack of political willpower, right? If you really want to do something, you're looking for opportunity. If you don't want to do something, you're looking for reason to justify you not doing it. And this is exactly what we can see, because we already heard a lot of different reasons from Ukrainians not being able to program those missiles to, I don't know, technologies getting in the hands of Russians and things like that. Um, we must, I think, we must understand that probably there is no will to pass those missiles to Ukraine for whatever reason, but I think it will not happen.
And when you hear allies of Ukraine in the West make the argument about not wanting to provoke Russia and escalate things further, what do you make of that when you hear that argument? Because, of course, it's very easy for someone who is not living in a country that's currently being illegally occupied to make that argument. And yet, it is a legitimate point that no one wants to see Vladimir Putin use tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine, for example. So, when you hear people talk about the risk of escalation and not wanting to provoke Russia further, what do you make of that?
There are two opinions. One opinion is like escalation is general, and it's one of the Russian narratives that are being spread on the West. It's like Russians and Ukrainians killing each other. We should stop escalation because they are killing each other. Ukrainians are defending because it's a proper thing to defend your home. You don't want to die because somebody just wants to kill you. He doesn't have that right. Nobody has. We all have right to live, and we have right to protect ourselves. This is why we are fighting. And another opinion is, of course, related to use of nuclear weapons, because people are afraid that if there is a chance that Russian army will be engaged in direct combat against NATO troops, this will inevitably lead to a nuclear war. On the other hand, considering the intensity of talks about using nuclear weapons on a Russian television, and all the attempts to scare the West, I think they understand the price of this, and they will never do that, of course.
That's really interesting. In terms of what we may see from Russia over the coming weeks, there has been speculation that they may launch a full-on assault on Kharkiv. Do you think that is feasible, and how would you rate the defense of Kharkiv at the moment?
At this point, we don't see any Russian assault groups or armies being concentrated on the direction of Kharkiv or Liman. They have troops that they can use on operational level, but not on the level of taking cities. I'm talking about strategic levels. There are no such groups, and if we will see them, we will be talking about it. But currently, it's not the case. The problem is Russians doing what they do best, which is demolishing cities. It's their favorite tactics that we could see in Grozny, in Chechnya, in Georgia, in Syria, in Aleppo. And this is exactly what they do here in Ukraine, in Mariupol, and currently we're talking about Kharkiv, unfortunately. So they're trying to demolish this city completely, and I think they will concentrate their attempts on destroying Kharkiv in the nearest future. They will raise the intensity of the strikes. I mean, this is what we will see in the nearest future.
Just to go back to our conversation earlier about Crimea, Russian sources have claimed that Ukraine conducted a short-range attack and strike against targets in Crimea on Monday night. Do you see Crimea as the soft underbelly of Russia's war effort? That if you can undermine Crimea, if you can destroy or damage further the Kerch Bridge, if you can continue to strike targets in Crimea, that is where Putin is at his weakest?
Absolutely. Currently, there's two soft underbellies of the Russian Empire. One is Bryansk, Kursk, Belgorod, those regions, because whenever they launch missiles at Ukrainian citizens from the territory of Belgorod, for example, they receive a response, and people who live in Belgorod, they realize that it's a game that to parties can play, right? And it's as dangerous to shoot Ukrainians for themselves as well. And this is why they react. And basically, we really hope that they will be wise enough to call their authorities to stop this insanity. But unfortunately, with Russia, it's not the case. And of course, the second soft underbelly is Crimea, because we know that with losing Crimea, Putin will most probably lose his life as well. That's why these strikes on strategic objects will continue. And of course, we expect that with the Ukrainian army gaining access to Azov Sea, at least, the future of so-called Russian Crimea will be under big question. So yes.
And on the tactics that we've seen from Ukraine of late, have you noticed any significant shift in tactics since General Starsky replaced General Zaluzhny, or have they been following, broadly speaking, the same tactical objectives?
Uh, well, currently we are talking about defensive actions, about active defense, and it didn't change much. So, because of the ammunition starvation, let's call it this way, we don't have much choice but to defend our positions. And if we cannot do that, we should slowly move back, inflicting as much casualties to the Russian personnel as possible. This is exactly what we saw in places like Avdiivka, for example. And this is what we see in several other spans of the front line. Not much time passed, I think, to talk about the differences in tactics, but at the same time, the commanders of the brigades, on the level of brigades, they're the same. They didn't change. They know their location. They know their ground, and I don't think that we will see any dramatic changes in the current tactics.
You mentioned Avdiivka there. Obviously, we have seen further incremental gains by the Russians in and around Avdiivka over recent weeks. How concerned are you about that?
There were several concerning cases recently, but with aid coming to the Ukrainian defenders, I'm sure that we will be able to deal with them.
How would you say morale is among Ukrainian troops at the moment?
Well, again, because of this American aid was approved, the morale is boosting, the morale is rising, which is good. I talked to different guys. They all say that we cannot wait until we receive our howitzers or shells. So the other problem is, of course, exhaustion of the troops, because I keep saying this, the guys keep fighting for more than 2 years already, and they feel exhausted. But this is the price we have to pay for our freedom, I think.
And just finally, Operator Starsky, I asked this question of Hamish de Bretton Gordon yesterday, and I'll ask it of you as well because I think it's insightful. What would constitute a successful May? We're speaking now at the start of May. What would constitute a successful month of May for Ukraine?
End of the war. We all expect this war to end tomorrow, like literally. But realistically speaking, of course, we understand that it's impossible, and it will end in several more years, which is more realistic. We know that Russia is capable of fighting for the next 2 or 4 years, according to different sources like Institute for Study and Warfare, for example. Successful May for us is, I think, probably increasing defense on our positions, building new lines of defenses, because this is something very important and cannot be ignored, and then concentrating new resources for a new counteroffensive.
Well, Brady Starsky, we always appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us today on Frontline.
Thank you so much.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio. My thanks to Louis Sykes, our producer. To support the work of Frontline, hit the subscribe button. You can also listen to Times Radio throughout the day or read it at times.co.uk. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.